I titled the video, "It is Good to Be of Norman Cavalier Tory Planter Confederate Stock." So, if you ever watch the Southern Israelites videos, and you listen to what he says, he will try to tell you that the Confederate planters descended from Anglo-Saxons or something. This is actually not true. And also Mormon Shaggy too. Mormon Shaggy claims that he descends from Confederate royalty, and then he says that he's like Welsh and German and stuff, but actually the Confederate planters came from the ruling class of England. Here's what happened. They're not directly descended from William the Conqueror's entourage, but the Normans in a pre-industrial age, the wealthiest and the best off people, or the best off men, were the ones who procreated the most. And the lesser off people did not procreate as much as more successful people did. So because the Normans in England were so better off than the rest of the population, they bred the most. And a lot of these bastards that were not fully Norman, they got into the population. And so basically a lot of Southerners who have ancestry in the planter elites, not all Southerners, but the planter elites, they all descend from very small families in the 1600s that were Cavaliers, or people that fought for King Charles Stuart, that fought for the Anglicans instead of the Presbyterians, and they descended from the Cavaliers. And these people tended to descend from a lot of the ruling noble houses of England. Not royalty, but generally from like the Norman kindred people. So they actually were descended from Vikings that landed in Normandy, became the Normans, went to England, to Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, and became the gentry. And then there was also a lot of upper-class landowning Englishmen who married into those families too. And a lot of these land-holding, entitled people supported the Stuarts in the English Civil War. And a lot of these people went to Virginia. And so Virginia's founding stock actually derives from like people from the southwest of England. And that's where the Confederates and the Tories and stuff come from. Rick Perry says, "Woo! I bet you that makes you so mad. Let's go." What's up, Rick Perry, bro? How's it going? So yeah, now England is still a monarchy today. Normandy in France is now a republic, but a lot of Norman nobles were guillotined in the French Revolution. Or at least quite a few Norman nobles that stayed in France were guillotined, along with a lot of the other nobility. Tits or GTFO. But yeah, the Southern Confederates are naturally descended of Norman nobility and of the Cavalier stock. I hope that I don't get a hate strike for this, but I descend from a lot of slave-holding Southerners myself. The Wimberleys were known to be Cavaliers, but they descend from Anglo-Saxons. So some of my ancestors, the Wimberleys, who moved to Texas, they came from the west of England, and they were Cavaliers, and they supported Charles Stuart or whatever. And I found out that a lot of Presbyterians supported the Jacobites And the Jacobites were actually pro-French, pro-Scottish, and anti-Union, and anti-royalist or whatever. Chad Kleckler. Nothing wrong with that. Take pride in your heritage. Heritage. Thank you, dude. Yeah, the Gaunts, they're descended of Norman nobility, and the Wimberleys descend from not Norman, but Cavalier heritage. They descend from Anglo-Saxons, but they were Cavaliers. Now, I have no idea how much of a percentage the Anglo-Saxons changed the British population or whatever, but a lot of them stayed Celtic as well as Anglo-Saxons, so it's very deeply rooted in the distant past. And ultimately, a lot of this stuff that we think or take for granted, it's really hard. There has been a lot of obfuscation. There has been a lot of kind of obstructification, and it's naturally not exactly the easiest thing to know all the answers to all of this stuff about the distant past. But yeah, I also have the Bickenbocks in my ancestry. The Bickenbocks, they came to Texas in the 1840s, and they lived in a city in central Germany for 300 years. They literally were living inside of Limproth or Limproth for 300 years, and there's direct family records and tracings of them living there for 300 years before they moved to Texas in the 1840s. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. And that was 175 years ago. And 300 years before that, the Bickenbocks lived in a town in Germany. Almost all the way back to the Middle Ages. I always thought that was so incredible. But yeah, dude, the Shelton line, the Shelton family, they're Johnny-come-latelys compared to William the Conqueror's Norman entourage, compared to the House of Wessex, the House of Essex. Southern Israelites' family are a bunch of Johnny-come-Elizabethan, Johnny-come-latelys. Like, the only time that the House of Shelton even appears is in the 1500s. That's really Johnny-come-latelys. Mormon Shaggy, he doesn't have no nobility or no gentry ancestry. Actually, the gentry and the nobility were different. But Mormon Shaggy has no gentry or no nobility. If you don't believe what I'm telling you, you could look at the writings of George Fitzhugh. George Fitzhugh, talked about how much of a problem the Puritans brought to America. In actuality, the Puritans were our enemies. The Puritans and the Quakers and stuff, they were the source of a lot of problems. They were the source of a lot of problems and issues and a lot of stuff that went wrong in the United States. A lot of these temperance societies, a bunch of these abolitionist societies and stuff, they all came from the Puritans, The Puritans didn't even exist before the 1600s. The feudal church for over 1,000 years did far more for Western civilization than anything the Puritans did in less than 100 years in the 17th or the 18th centuries, bro. Visible by his phenotype, LOL. Yeah, dude, I probably do have some inbred features, but I don't think that that's anything to be ashamed about. I don't think that's anything to be ashamed about. The South, the Deep South is the oldest region in the Anglo part of the United States. The Deep South goes all the way back to Roanoke in 1589, 1588. Oh, 1586. Like, the history of Virginia goes all the way back to Roanoke Island. I meant Shaggy's lack of nobility. Oh, yeah, obviously. Yeah, he descends from overwhelming peasant stock. But yeah, George Fitzhugh talked a lot about how the southern states were drawn from the Cavaliers, and how they were always against the Puritans, and how these Cavaliers opposed the monetary orders and the mercantile societies that supported the Puritans and the Pilgrims and all of these radical Protestant sects. You know, radical Puritans were not allowed in the Commonwealth of Virginia or in the Commonwealth of Maryland. They were told to go to New England. But yeah, I always found that so interesting about just all of those centuries and centuries of noble lineage and royal lineages and stuff. And I don't claim that my personal ancestry goes back that many centuries or goes back that far, but I'm just saying that there is a lot of connections here between the Norman entourage of William the Conqueror, the Angevin and the Norman gentry, the English gentry and the Cavaliers, and the very strong Toryish or Tory-like manifestations in the American colonies, and basically the equestrian kind of mindset of the Southern founding fathers, and then the Confederates, because the Confederates borrowed a lot of the lost cause from the Cavalier myth, or the Cavalier mythology. A lot of that was borrowed into the lost cause of the Confederacy. So there's definitely a lot of historical connections and ties here. Not always necessarily of lineage and ancestry entirely, but just of social networking and different ways that the different states were organized and created from the colonial period down to recent times. Because Texas is an offshoot of Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, etc., and Missouri, which are in turn offshoots of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, and those are in turn were offshoots of England. So it all interconnects. There's a lot of intricacies and interconnections. George Fitzhugh was able to pick up on a lot of this stuff before the Civil War. He understood a lot of the history and stuff about it. So yeah, that was basically it. Hope y'all enjoyed it.